Welcome to the moment that changed everything, where we interview notable creative people to gain insights into how they got started and learn more about the moments that shaped them and their careers. Today we sit down with Ari Elkouby, Executive Creative Director at Wunderman Thompson.
No, but I think, as a creative person, I think, it's another problem to solve, right? And if creativity is the killer app for problem solving, why only apply it to communications? Why not apply it to the entire business?
Ari's career has taken him from a package design department at Loblaws to Fallon Worldwide in Minneapolis to several senior positions at agencies across Toronto. In this episode, we go into detail about his interactive agency pedigree and how it informs his approach to creative, how he likes to form close relationships with clients to build trust, and an agency partner who specialized in updating brand mascots like the Jolly Green Giant. This episode has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, North America's only brief-based challenge that sends winners to Cannes, France.
Ari, thanks
Yes.
for coming on the show.
I'm delighted to be here.
Listen, I don't want to, push this into the political realm, but the election is heating up south of the border, and the one thing that whenever I watch politics, is that some people just seem like they have a leadership qualities, and others you just can't see them in that position.
Yeah.
I know that you've risen through the ranks, and I always felt like you had. I always thought that you had a sense that you were going to be rise to a certain level in this business, and I feel like you've held this position for a couple of years. And does it feel comfortable for you? And is this what you wanted to do, or did it just happen more organically?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it's funny, your career kind of takes you on certain paths and you get exposed to certain kinds of people, and I think they influence you in terms of maybe molding where you think your career is going to go. Mm-hmm. So I think, along the way, I've met amazing leaders along the way, and they've sort of planted the idea in my head that, hey, you know what, this is an option for you. You could aspire to go down this road and lead a department and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, I don't know if it was ever a grand plan of mine, from starting out in art college to go and be in ECD. Mm-hmm. I think it was always the aspiration there and the hunger and the desire to do great work and be recognized and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think when it comes to believable leaders in their roles, I think I've seen a lot of them in the business. Mm-hmm. There's some that you're like, I'll follow this person into battle, no problem, and they're just natural born leaders. And then there's the leaders that you're a little bit kind of suspicious of, and you're like, I don't know if what this person is saying is the right path, and I'll be a bit wary on this. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to find myself in this position, and it's going pretty good, pretty swell.
I think it makes sense that you're gonna be a highly awarded creative, and the next step would be then to move up the management mm-hmm. ranks. They want your ideas and your brain focused on helping others get to the same level as you, and I think there's a lot of that in many businesses, but I think in this business, there's a big difference between managing creatives and being a creative yourself, or coming up with ideas yourself. And some people are very good at coming up with the idea, but maybe lack the skills to manage effectively. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I worded it in such a way that seemed like kind of cruel, but it was like, how do you tell someone they have a terrible idea?
Yeah.
Push comes to shove. I think a leader's ability to not crush somebody and find the nugget that's in an idea and help them, make it something better is a real skill.
It totally is, and it's really interesting. There was a moment in my career when I was at BBDO Proximity, and they were like militant about this kind of stuff. Like they were very big about acknowledging that people who are becoming managers, people who are mentoring other creatives, whose, careers are really in their hands, get the training to actually fulfill that role. And it's silly to assume that just because you're good at what you do as a creative person, that you're also going to naturally flower into this amazing manager. So they dumped a boatload of money into me and other creatives to go off and really work on the craft of being a manager. And I'm forever in their debt, because I have an idea of what they invested, and it's a lot. And I think it's something that I think a lot of organizations should do, and acknowledge that, listen, our best stars need some training if they really want to move up the ranks. And if we want to keep them, we need to invest in them. So yeah, I don't think I was a terribly good manager early on. And to all the creatives listening or watching, who had to put up with me in those early days, I appreciate it, and I hope it's working with me is better now.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, I think there is a push and pull kind of in this business, and no matter what anybody says, I think that it's a business that skews young. Senior staff, I think, seem to be getting younger and younger, but that might not be a fair criticism. But I think it's fair to say that if it is sort of a younger business, being a good manager sometimes comes with maturity. It comes with experience. It comes with age. And so you're asking someone who's maybe on the less experienced side for them to just naturally be that way. And I think there are people who are naturally that way. I think they're called old souls or something like that, right?
I think there are, for sure. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think sometimes, the war wounds or the experience does come in handy, when you're, talking to somebody about a sensitive, issue, and you have to kind of sit them down and say, hey, listen, like, I've been in this position myself, and I've done it the way that you're heading down the road to do it, and I'm telling you right now, it's not a positive one. It's not going to turn out well. Like,
it blew me up, so I'm sure it's going to blow you up, right? Yeah.
But yeah, it's like a little bit of that wisdom that comes from having done it, for sure. But yeah, I think also it's important to put yourself in that person's shoes as well, and realize, hey, listen, I've sat where you're sitting, and I can empathize with what you're going through, and you're trying to make a name for yourself, and you're trying to create great work, and things can be frustrating, and this and that. But yeah, I think cooler heads, should prevail and try to do this, and things will work out for you.
One thing I wanted to bring up was, I ask everyone who comes on what their pathway was into the business. Recently had Craig Brownrigg on, who was a commercial director, right?
Yeah. So
we had a really good conversation. He brought up something that was interesting, and it was, people that we know that didn't really start in advertising somehow backed into the business for whatever scenario brought them into. And those stories are becoming fewer and fewer because, there's more and more learning institutions that specialize in advertising, and many of the people coming up decide to go into advertising, take that path, and make their way up the ranks. You don't hear so much about the bartenders who were,
that's right,
tending bar, and some senior creative came in and they said, I kind of like the way you think. And then somehow they became a writer and art director in a big agency and went on to do great things. What was your story going? I know you went to OCAD, but
I had an amazing journey, and I wouldn't trade it in for anything. So I started actually working in package design at Loblaws. So as a co-op student in high school, I would go, and like once a week, I would go in the afternoon, and I would get to run around and be a junior assistant in a creative department. It was packaging. It wasn't a traditional advertising agency, but it was amazing. And it was at a point in time where a lot of what was coming into the department was still craft, and it was still done by hand. So
was this like President's Choice? Like what?
President's Choice.
Okay.
Yeah. And No Name and everything along with it. So So, the packages would all have these beautiful illustrations on them. Well, those illustrations had to come from somewhere. Right. So I would be the one to file all the illustrations that came in from the artists after they got scanned, and all the hand lettering that came in from, who are now the biggest names in typography in Canada and illustration. And I would get to see the actual craft of making, a commercial product, which was fascinating. And that kind of tipped the scales for me. I think I always knew I wanted to do something in the world of art, and loved to draw as a kid and all that stuff. But that experience really opened my eyes that, hey, you can actually make a living interacting with, illustrations and typography and photography and all these other artists. So it was amazing that was even a job. And I guess I should have known better, because, someone made that package. So
well, I'm resisting the urge to say, love what you did with No Name. With the yellow and the black type. And you really the
Helvetica, it's a classic. It's a classic. Yeah, but even that, was interesting. Like, from a marketing perspective, that was a response to the recession. So they created something that was more economically attainable by stripping back all of that stuff. So it wasn't in the absence of also having another private label offering, like a PC that cost more, but it was a smart marketing move.
Oh man, when I think about President's Choice, I just think it's like a masterful job of taking a private label and making it into a public label in many ways, right? Like they really did create something that people then looked at, put a higher value on something that was, we tend to think of house brands as something that is, quote unquote, cheaper.
That's right.
Yeah. So that was really impressive. So how did you go then from the internal design packaging department?
So it's an interesting journey. So from there, I went to work, I graduated high school and needed a summer job. And some of the designers that I had worked with had moved to another design firm. And they gave me a call and said, hey, are you looking for, summer work? We'd love to have you in. And this was more of a branding and packaging company. So this was a Minnesota-based outfit called Pedersen Gask, and they had a Canadian office, and they had an interesting gig where they did packaging, but they also did facelifts for brand mascots. So every once in a while, you'll notice this, like the Green Giant will get a new haircut. They'll like separate the leaves a little bit, or like his sideburns will get like shorter and modernize it.
Yeah, sure.
And they did all that stuff.
Wow, I can't believe that is so specialized.
It's so specialized, but it was incredible because it exposed me first to a world I didn't even know existed. I guess I thought the Green Giant was just a regular person and he always just showed up looking the same way.
Oh.
The idea that you could actually influence what they looked like, to change the tone or the approachability or the modernness of it was like completely foreign to me. But as a junior summer student, you don't get exposed to all the inner workings of all the strategic sessions of why he looks the way he does. But it started to introduce me to new concepts like archetypes. It's like, oh, that's interesting. What's an archetype? What archetype is the brawny man? What archetype is the Green Giant? What archetype should his little son Sprout? Remember Sprout?
Right.
The little giant?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and even the concept of Sprout must have been something new at some point.
Yeah, it was all crazy. So
I thought the Green Giant was single, and all this time he's got a family that no one knew about in Minnesota.
Yeah. Where's Mrs. Giant?
Yeah.
Where did this guy come from? Jeez. So it was a really like fascinating introduction into brand, and that kind of opened my eyes. And then, of course, I was going to OCAD at that time, so I had a desire to get into advertising, and that really interested me. And I'd already been down the packaging. Right. And had been exposed to typography and been exposed to illustration through my, experience, my work experience. And I had a sense that I probably either wasn't good enough to do some of those things like illustration, which I'm still a huge fan of and in awe of, or it just wasn't for me. So that kind of led me down the path to advertising.
So in one of your first interviews, would I open up your portfolio and see a bunch of package design, or did you?
My
create ads?
OCAD portfolio was full of package designs that actually ran, and I remember having this moment when I was working for PC, and I was at one of the checkout counters, and somebody actually had, I think it was a can of something, and they just took it out of their thing, and they just like didn't even look at it. They just kind of like plunked it on the counter, and they just grabbed the next thing, celery or whatever. And for me, I had like this moment of like joy. I was like, oh my God, they bought the thing that I worked on. That's incredible. And then that very quickly was followed by, but she doesn't feel the same way about that thing than I do. Like, it's just a thing. It's just a vessel to get the beans home from the store.
Sure.
So that kind of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. So
she carelessly threw it onto the belt.
Exactly. I spent hours working on that.
Yeah.
I remember, it's funny, when I was at OCAD and I had a copywriting class, and one of my professors was telling a similar story where he had worked tirelessly on this headline, this very witty headline, and it was on the back of the newspaper, and he could see the person reading it and interacting with the ad, and just flipped over the page, didn't even consider the headline, didn't consider the ad, and he was furious inside. He was just like boiling that he'd spent so much time and effort working on this. Crafting this thing.
Someone that, of course, that you know very well, Zach.
Of course, yeah.
He told me a story of working in England and seeing someone engrossed in something that he had created on the when he was on the tube.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so he has kind of the opposite side of that story. But I think when you're a young creative and you get to see something that you've created out there, of course, it's a double-edged sword, right? It's sort of like, for one guy, it's someone who's totally not engaged, and another guy, it's something that someone's engrossed in, and that's a good feeling. I always like to tell the story about my father, who is a sheet metal worker, who, sometimes he would see a terrible ad and he would criticize it, but then he'd turn to me and say, "I'm sorry." Right. And I was like, I didn't do that. It's like every piece of advertising I'm not responsible for. I don't look at a bent up piece of sheet metal and think, way to go, Pete. Nice job.
Yeah.
But that is that it's kind of funny. That's a thrilling thing, but it's a thrilling thing that goes away eventually in a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm still, that kid who gets excited by seeing that stuff, either on air or on a billboard or whatever. But I certainly don't get as emotionally up or down as I did in that grocery line with that person putting that can of beans on the counter. So
who gave you your first job? Who are you speaking with, and what agency?
Good question. So during university, I was bartending like everyone does in university. And a regular in the bar was inquiring about me and asking me what I was studying. And he said, I'm running an interactive agency in Toronto. Would you be interested in like working there a couple of days a week? And I was studying advertising at OCAD, and I was looking up at my heroes, and all my heroes were writing Super Bowl ads and doing amazing, traditional, quote unquote, advertising. I was like, I don't want to waste my time with this interactive company. Like, I've got my sights set on.
I'm set for bigger things.
And then over time, I think he sort of persisted, and I went for an interview, and I got involved in this during the boom of the interactive kind of phase, and ultimately the bust of it. But my first kind of paying gig, I guess you could say, in a agency environment was this interactive firm.
Wow.
And I'm grateful to this day that I did that, because I got exposed to some amazing work, and sort of I caught the technology bug early, and I loved the idea that you could interact with something and that consumers could have a two-way relationship with your art and with your work and with your messaging. It wasn't a passive experience where you kind of look at the thing and read it, or watch the commercial, and you could actually input or respond to what's happening on the website. So that was really interesting. And then from there, was kind of set on a course to really work in interactive departments inside of larger agencies. So from there, I went to FCB, and I think I was employee number 2 of the interactive department of FCB. I think it was called FCBI before it became ultimately FCB 6. And it was really kind of creating interactive or multimedia experiences based on the traditional campaigns within FCB. So, they had Levi's and Coors Light and all these other traditional great big brands. And they wanted to know what to do with this interactive internet thing and how can we bring our campaign into that world. So
do you feel that makes you different, like coming up that way rather than the traditional side? And now that you've risen to where you are now, do you feel like you've got sort of a different perspective?
I think so. Yeah. And I remember I was interviewing for a job in an agency, and I had this background, and I was getting calls from places saying, "Hey, listen, you've got this really interesting background. You've got this knowledge base that it's hard to find." And at that time, it was kind of even lesser so because you had to be, really a developer or knowing code, and those people really didn't understand, or it was kind of more difficult for them to grasp advertising concepts. So here was somebody who understood advertising and marketing concepts, ideas essentially, and how they could interact in this new space. So I think it really did, and I think that's probably why I got a phone call from Fallon saying, "Hey, would you be interested in living in the Midwest?"
Well, it's interesting. I mean, my wife's from Wisconsin. I'm down in the Midwest a lot. Big Packer fan. I think you're a Dallas fan, aren't you?
Yeah,
we're mortal enemies.
Right, we are. Yeah. Although we now have your old coach.
Oh, that's right. McCarthy, I forgot McCarthy. That's right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of.
See if he can sprinkle some Packer magic on the Cowboys.
Yeah. Well, he definitely took the Packers to a lot of a lot of playoffs,
and beat the Cowboys in all of them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I know. So Fallon, that would be where?
Minneapolis. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about that experience. I mean, what was that like?
That was nuts. I mean, again, another really valuable life experience.
Well,
and I think
a legendary agency.
Yeah, legendary. But I'd say, even beyond that, I think anybody who sort of has an opportunity to move, and this industry is so great for that, you can pick up and you can go work at Leo Burnett in Chicago, or, there's transferable skills here.
Sure.
You should really take the advantage of doing that, because I think travel and working abroad, especially in the US, is such an advantage because Canadians have this, I think, inferiority complex with the United States. And the same is true with advertising experience. So, if you've worked in the US at a big US shop, all of a sudden, you're seen as, having, of course, an elevated status over maybe somebody in Canada who doesn't have that same experience. Yeah. So it's a perception, I think, thing that can actually work in your benefit. But that was an amazing experience. I'm a Toronto kid. I grew up, born and raised in Toronto, in the big city. And living in the US, I think, was always sort of an interest of mine. You watch television and you see all these big cities and you think, oh, okay, they're all bigger than Toronto. And then you go to one and you realize, hey, you know what? Just because they have, a football team or,
sure,
a legendary, hockey team or baseball team doesn't mean they're a better city than Toronto is. And that was my experience in Minneapolis. It's like a lot of other U.S. cities. After 5 o'clock, the entire city shuts down. Everyone gets in their cars and drives out to their neighborhood, and that's where they live.
Right.
And it's just a completely different way of living. And in Toronto, with residences downtown and restaurants and bars and art galleries and nightlife, there's like this buzz, this energy that the city gives you. And it was not in Minneapolis, at least we're in the downtown.
I bet. I mean, that's a different experience. I had the opportunity to live and work in New York for a couple of years. I mean, I have and continue to have this long love affair with the U.S. One of the cultural differences that I noticed was and I don't know if this was your experience too. You talk about the difference between U.S. culture and Canadian culture. I think the joke with Canadian is, a go for bronze attitude.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that kind of a bit more reserved. And in the U.S., the one thing I really loved about them was that they really lived and breathed this idea that they were all about the idea, and they didn't care where it came from.
Yeah.
And even when I worked down there, I'd be like, I think being a Canadian was somewhat exotic to them. They were like, oh, the Canadian guy or whatever.
Right.
But I felt this real openness of it's just in their DNA to really want to get the best thing out there, and they don't care where it comes from. They're just hyper focused on that.
That was Fallon to a T. I mean, at its height, I think there was like 700 people there, maybe more. And the people that were at Fallon were from all over the world. It was like the United Nations inside of an advertising agency. So they had plucked like the very best like interactive developers and designers from Sweden. They took all the best graphic designers from Brazil, and they had them. They had all the best copywriters from New York and Boston there. So it was incredible because you'd literally walk the hall and you could, guarantee you were talking to somebody from some other part of the world.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Yeah. I mean, I did have this one little experience where, I was, working in New York and working with a bunch of people from different places from the US and stuff like that. Sometimes I'd be like getting the gears from somebody for being Canadian, right? And it's like, oh, are you Canadians or whatever like this? I'm like, but like, I'm from, we're Toronto. It's a great city. What are you talking? I'm taking shit from someone from Denver. It's like, no offense to anybody in Denver, because I've heard it's an amazing city, but it's like, I'd just be like, what are you, look, I know where you're from, you didn't grow up here. But yeah, I thought the cultural differences, you can easily look at Canadians and Americans and think that they share so many similarities in ways, like as you said, they get in their cars, they go to the suburbs, they live where they live, they do the same things. Yeah. But there's definitely an attitude difference between them.
Yeah, and I didn't feel it as much in Minneapolis, because I think it's one of the only major U.S. cities actually further north than Toronto while still being south of the border.
But did they think you were from a colder place?
No, it was interesting because they are a lot like Canadians. Like I think, Fargo aside, and those references.
You betcha. Oh, nice.
And Hot Dish and all that.
Yeah.
But a lot of their values were very similar. So it was very easy to get along with them. They were very open and friendly and, loved hockey, and a lot of the references and things that they grew up doing, I grew up doing. So, not very judgmental. I think they had a thriving, LGBTQ community there, great music scene, great theater scene. So it was a creative hotbed. And that was really, it was so fascinating. And I remember talking to somebody about like why that was so, and how was even an agency like Fallon, how could that even blossom in Minneapolis? And somebody said, because I'm fascinated by this stuff, about, why things are the way they are and how do they get that way. And someone said, well, you could trace it almost all the way back to General Mills. So as a cereal company, I don't know why they founded it when they did or where they did, but they were founded in Minnesota, and they were pumping out all kinds of products. And those products need names, they need package art, they need marketing, they need all that stuff. So naturally, it fostered this really creative community in a sort of unexpected place. And then when, ultimately big agencies started to take off and, Fallon began to rose, there was already this fertile bed planted of talent to draw from, whether it was illustrators or what have you. So yeah, it's just fascinating how a completely unrelated industry could help influence the advertising community.
Well, I was going to say, not to drag it back into football, because I'm not sure everybody's a big fan, but I go to Green Bay every summer, right? And of course, it's there's one thing happening in that town, and that's that football.
That's
team,
right. Yeah.
But I remember someone telling me, it's like, you watch teams, and when they go into Miami, you might see them drop a game in Miami. Not because the Dolphins are so good. It's just that there's such a party town. There's so many distractions that the team flies in the night before and goes out and parties and loses their mind. Yeah. Same thing maybe in New York, you could kind of say that. I mean, I don't know if that translates into the experience at Fallon, like that there's less distractions, there's more focus. They're not in New York and they're not in Los Angeles. Maybe that's helpful for them in creating that culture where it's just a hyper focus on the work and making it great.
You know what? I think that there's something to that because, the agency itself almost became a neighborhood unto itself. I mean, it was so big. Yeah. It was a community for sure. And, they did everything possible to make you happy there. So, they were catering food in every night. So they really wanted to make sure that wasn't because they were pitching day and night, it's because they really wanted to make sure, like, if you felt like you wanted to stay there and hang out with your fellow partner or, fellow Fallonites, you could. And, it didn't mean you had to get in your car.
They didn't expect you to stay late.
No, not at all. But they just made it such a comfortable environment that you kind of wanted to, because there was really nowhere else, I think, in Minneapolis that you could go and experience this multiculturalism and this array of ideas. And, of course you could still go to a, Vikings game or a Twins game in that terrible old stadium. But yeah, it was an attractive place to spend your time. And, I think that was one of those kind of places where they understood culture and the importance of culture. And they nailed it.
So was the idea going to Fallon that it was going to be a short-term play? Did you consider staying there? What brought you back home?
I mean, I think I was just homesick, frankly. That was also a time where I think they were also going through a lot of kind of changes at the senior most levels. So they'd been through kind of a couple of creative directors after Loblaws had left. So people were kind of still figuring out, what that agency was gonna be, and and again, I think the city just didn't grip me the same way that Toronto did, and sure. Sometimes you don't know what you've got till it's gone, right? So, luckily, I was able to move back. But what that experience taught me was to really think really big, and I think working in Canada, you have these kind of small regional budgets.
Sure.
And I think Canadians are so good at this; they can kind of find ways to be scrappy and come up with really electric ideas on very little budgets. The US is the opposite. You have all the money in the world, and you can have Jay-Z in your spot if you want. Right. So it kind of allowed me to open my mind a little bit and say, okay, you know what? Dream a bit bigger, aspire to a bit more than, you're not in Canada anymore.
We talk a lot about mentors on this show, and so did you meet one there, or who would you describe as maybe the number one person in your career who has informed how you work and who you are now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I don't think there was one person per se that really did it. And I said, man, like, I want to be just like that person. But there were little people along the way that I certainly looked up to and I admired, and I'd have interactions with them, and they would sort of show me their view on the world and their philosophies, and share, what they think, is the right way to go about, being a creative person and what inspires them. So there were a few along the way. There were certainly quite a few at Fallon, absolutely, who, were again from all over the world and taught me different things. Same thing back here in Canada. I was exposed to a lot of people at BBDO and FCB, and of course Zach, great creative leader and mentor. But yeah, I don't know if there was a single one who kind of encapsulated it all and I said, I want to be the next so and so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think often people will look back at their career and identify certain individuals who they just felt like, for whatever reason, clicked for whatever reason. I think it's funny too, because
it might have to do with sort of how I came up to, because there wasn't a model to follow, that I followed. There wasn't the person who started working in interactive and then or packaging and branding, and then interactive, and then went on to advertising. You know, like there wasn't that, oh yeah, I want to follow their trajectory. So I kind of had to find my own way a little bit, but along the way, yeah, just influenced by so many great people. And I'm still influenced today. Even, I don't even know if there are necessarily other, ECDs or CCOs. I mean, I'm still learning and being influenced by people who work with me who are, intermediate writers or art directors. Like I still try to be a sponge and learn from other people who have a great experience and have done amazing things.
Does that mean that you worked alone a lot? Like we think about working in teams in this business. Does that mean you were kind of conceiving on your own?
It's funny. Like I think I became a creative sort of leader or a creative director earlier on. And it was such that I had to kind of lead pieces of business and have teams kind of working and showing work to me. So it was strange. And I think, where, the branching off of art director and writer happened for me is when I went to Fallon. I had a writer who I'm still very good friends with, who's now a ECD in San Diego at a interactive agency. He and I were partners and we got along famously. But as soon as I went to Fallon, they were looking for that one person. They weren't looking for the team. So that kind of took me on a bit of a solo journey. And again, that was also a bit going off script, right? As a creative person, you travel, with your partner and you have success together. And I had to kind of figure that out as well along the way.
Well, and I think every market has this where you'll see successful teams that decide that they're going to stick together, and then they go to different places, but they're always together and they rise through the ranks and then, get big jobs at big agencies doing the thing that they do well. I mean, partnerships are like any relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I've, when I think about, I had a great partner in New York and, we had a lot of fun working together. He was a great person. And, it's like breaking up with somebody, It's like,
it really is.
Having to come in that day. I mean, you got to tell your bosses. I mean, that's stressful enough.
Yeah.
But then when you got to go to your partner and kind of go, hey, guess what? I'm getting out of here now. And you got to go through that. It's you spend a lot of time together.
You really do. You really do. And you're right. You share your hopes and dreams, right? You really do. You kind of invest emotionally in ideas that you conceive together and, what that means for you and your careers. And
it's like real life too. It's like it never happens that two people go, you know what? I'm thinking that, we've run the course here. And then the other person says, yeah, I think that's about right. And then you split up.
Yeah.
It's usually one person who's decided they want to exercise an option to do something else. And the other person is like, oh, I'm a little bit bummed about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's a right way of going about it, because I think you can be successful either way, right? You can kind of say, listen, I had this opportunity. I can't pass up. I got to go. I got to explore this. Otherwise, I'll just kind of kick myself for the rest of my life if I don't go and do this.
Right.
And there's people who are like, you know what? I don't want to mess up a good thing. Sure. This partnership is hard to find, and it really is hard to find. And once you've got it, hang on to it with everything you got. So, I think it just comes down to a kind of a personal decision you have to make. But yeah, I think my desire to explore, what it would mean to work in the US and then at a place like Fallon sort of forced me to kind of roll the dice and give it a shot.
Clearly at your level now, and I'm sure leading up to this point too, such a big part of climbing that management ladder is having great relationship with clients, being able to sell, being able to get clients to trust you, things like that. Is that something that you found came naturally to you, or did you have to work at that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny because I'm an agency brat, right? So I grew up and in a lot of multinationals, and there's the account service department, and those are the people who have the conversations with the clients. And
you're in the back.
Yeah, and you come in when you're told to sort of like pitch the idea, and then you leave, and then you handle all the back and forth with the account people. And there is certain account people to this day where I would say you're actually more qualified to share and present this idea than I am. Like, you have the relationship.
Right.
You could do a better job of this. But at the same time, there was people I'd run into where I just kind of felt like a good connection with. And I said, you know what? Why does it have to be such that only one group of this department is presenting to the client, having a relationship with the client? And the client is sort of it's a 4-letter word. I like to think of them as people, and there's Jim and Sam and Dave and Sally and whoever else. And let's just get together and talk about ideas. And if it means, going out for a beer or staying after work and chatting or going for a coffee and just, having a relationship and finding out, where are their aspirations? Where do they want to go? Where do they want to take the brand? Because those, might be counter to what we assume. And, sometimes when you're in an office environment and there's a boardroom table and there's, fancy chairs, it's hard to kind of reveal that stuff. So I love having relationships with my clients, and I've got great ones. They're always based on honesty. And I think there's this sort of preconceived notion that, I can't tell the agency everything. I have to kind of hold something back, and I can't be too transparent. And I just push and push and push. And I'm like, we're in this together and we're going to achieve great things together. And let's just be honest with each other. And that seems to work. So it was certainly something that, did take some kind of getting used to, the idea of not betraying the account service group, but acknowledging that, hey, you know what? It's better if we all have relationships with our partners and our clients. And if there's, things that are keeping them up at night that are bugging them, and for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable telling me, they can tell someone in the account service team, or if they are uncomfortable telling somebody on the account service team, or it's better suited coming to me, that they could do that. And I'm very fortunate that the folks that are working on the brands that we work on, I consider them more friends than I would clients. Like genuinely, like I enjoy having a beer with them and dinner with them, and sharing passionately why this idea should live, or our hopes for what this will do for their business. And I think they totally see that, and they see the energy. And I can cite it back to a conversation we had at a bar when we were talking about X or Y. And I think that's a more meaningful relationship than you show up once a week and you present your wares and you go back to the agency and you kind of cross your fingers and hope you sold it.
Well, I mean, I think you would agree with this. This business is not to bring up another sports thing, but like it is a game of inches, in that in execution, I think everybody has that sense where when they have an idea that they've thought out and they see and envision, that there are deal breakers within that. And clients will sometimes hit on one of those deal breakers. And then it's really that moment whether or not you're going to be able to retain it, or you're going to start compromising it. And then, for some ideas, it's the beginning of the tiny little cut that ends up marginalizing the work, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You have to be successful where you're at. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but this seems to be a strategy of yours. Not that it's disingenuous, but that if you have an intimate knowledge of what they want, it's much easier for you to control that whole scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I don't think it's as calculated as that, but I think it gives the idea a little bit longer lease on life, because someone can say, Ari, I'm going to get killed by compliance on this thing, or I'm going to really run into legal issues if we go down this path, or you don't know this, but inside the organization, this and this and this is happening. And that stuff is just good to know, not only for that idea, but other ideas going forward. So I think that level of partnership and transparency does help, because sometimes we can say, hey, listen, I'm glad you told me that. Let me go run off and see if we can fix it, versus thank you for your proposal. It's dead. Right. Which is, and it's like, oh, case closed. Like, don't I get a chance to kind of, bend this thing or mold this thing? And very few times, I think, has an idea been pitched where we went in and we said, we're going to do this, and it hasn't been shaped and modeled and changed somehow a little bit. So I think even emotionally, you kind of have to be open to the fact that this this is sort of like in a amuse bouche, it's a starting point. It's going to change, it's going to take on a slightly different life. But as long as the original intent is still there and the vision is still upheld, I think you're okay with it changing.
Let me ask you this, because you came from this interactive side, and there's a technological aspect to that. Has never been more ways for I'll call it the layperson to creatively express themselves or express an artistry. In this business, there's a lot of that. So now you have clients that are, who knows, creating their own videos on the weekend, or active in social media, or using apps that allow them to express their creativity. And they are going to be on the other side of the table judging something that maybe before it was kind of like, we were behind, there was a curtain and you could see behind it.
Yeah.
How do you think that's changed the way in which, has it made it harder to sell creative ideas because of that?
I don't know if it's made it harder to sell them, but I think, you can't get away with, pleading ignorance to stuff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to be part of every platform, or at least have a general understanding of why it's being used the way it is and how your target is engaging with it. I think naturally, because of my background, I'm a kind of a gadget head. Like, I love reading tech blogs, and there's a new scientist who just discovered this different printing method that can do this or that, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's part of an idea we can roll into a campaign in the future. So I think being as curious as possible and open to kind of new, whether it's craft or technologies, I think has paid off well for me in my career. But if there's a client who is a wizard at something, or is equally as sort of tech focused, or interested in how something is made, I love learning from them too. And sharing links and swapping. Hey, it'd be interesting if we took this approach maybe for our next campaign, or hey, have you seen this kind of camera? Or I'm a shutterbug on the weekend and came across this thing, what do you think? So it's, again, I think as long as that relationship is there, where that kind of free flow of ideas and influences and fear and, and hope is shared, then I think it's all good. It's all beneficial. So I don't think it's a impediment. I think, if anything, I hope it's a sign of a healthy relationship if they kind of are doing something that we don't know about, or right, we can't do, but they have a passion for, and knowing they have a passion for that, who knows where that would lead.
In terms of your focus, I was going to say, as creatives rise up through the ranks, oftentimes what will happen is they will get fewer assignments where it's just creative and they get to express their creativity. You're now in this position where you're involved in the creativity, you're shaping it in a way, there's ownership in ways with that. At the wee hours of the morning when, when you're younger in your career, you might be super focused on your idea and wanting to see it be successful. What happens at 3 a.m. in the morning for you now? Or is it just like, is it a numbers game at your level now?
No, that's a good question. At 3 a.m., literally nowadays, I've got a newborn, so I hope I'm sleeping. If I'm up, it's probably because he's up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what are the things that I worry about? It's funny, like when you're a creative, I have a notebook and on it are the things I need to do. Or when I was a, hands-on art director or ACD, I would have all the campaigns that I was working on. I got to call this photographer and brief them. I need to look into this with the technology team. I need to do this and this and this. And then as soon as you become an ECD, what you do with your notebook, and this is what I do, is you draw a line down the middle of the page, and on one side is the work, and on the other side is operations. And I think that side is the one I still naturally just kind of want to lean back into and double check on how those things are going. But you, of course, can't neglect all the other things that are on the other side of the page, whether it's new business or staffing or PR for the agency or your client's business or what have you. So, I mean, I think I'm still a creative at heart. So, if I am losing sleep over something, it's probably a campaign idea that I'm in love with, and I want to make sure goes through well the next day, or if it's sitting with the client and we're due to hear feedback the next day, I'm probably still losing sleep over that stuff. And I think that's partly why we all got into this business is for the creative, and I still love that part of the business, and I'm still exposed to that part of the business quite a bit, and I hope I always will be. It's funny, when I was younger, I had a little internship at Taxi, and I remember there was a moment, and I had to walk into Zach's office, and he was working on a campaign, and I thought, but he's like the chief creative officer. Like, you don't do that. You manage the creative department, and that's it. And you don't write headlines anymore. You don't craft ads. And I think that was the first time I realized, oh wait, you can do both. You can still have a hand in the creative process and lead a department. And that was something that I think I always kind of held on to throughout my career. Even as I rose up the ranks, I always wanted to make sure that I wasn't completely removed from the making process of, how ideas get generated and how they're produced. And, there are a couple of pet projects that I would still have. So that, that was a little reminder that you can't lose sight of, the love of why you got into this business in the first place.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you were to give someone some advice in terms of maybe emulating how you've risen through this industry, what would you say to them? What are the habits they need to keep, or how could they do what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, I think I remember when I was really young, I was having coffee with a headhunter, Heidi Ellers. I don't know if you know Heidi.
Yeah.
I love Heidi to death. And she gave me some really good advice. And she said, if you're looking to get into a place, be ruthless about the amount of research you do on that place. Know who works there, know what campaigns they worked on. If you're being interviewed by somebody, know the work that they've done, have an opinion about their work. And if you really want to work there, do a spec ad about the clients that are at that company to show, hey, this isn't just the work I've done historically, but and here's an idea for one of your clients. And that was something that I think really kind of stayed with me as well, and it has served me well. I haven't seen it as much as maybe I would like when you're interviewing young people, is who's really done their homework, and who knows where you were before you landed here, and what campaigns did you work on, so on and so forth. So I would encourage people, and it's never been easier, right? I mean, LinkedIn exists, sure. And search histories, and Google exists to find what did that person work on, and did they write an article, and what did they say in it, and all that kind of stuff. It's easy to find. So I think that goes a long way, and it shows, hey, here's somebody who is committed, and this is an interview 8 on their docket of 20. They actually have invested the time to learn about the person they're talking to.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
Just back up for a minute and talk about the industry as a whole. I think I can remember there's always been a ton of conversations about whether it's the fragmentation of media, or that the ad spends have changed drastically. Yeah. You're at a big company now. There's always that talk of whether or not the big agencies are really in danger of somehow crumbling in some way. Of course, right now there's a lot of internal agencies that seem to be popping up on the client levels. What's your take on the industry and how it's changed over the last little while? And what's your opinion on the survival of big agency brands like JWT?
Or Wunderman Thompson now.
Wunderman.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all good. It's all
good. I think of it as the same thing, but it's not.
Yeah. So, it's funny. Like I remember early on, you would have an idea and the team would talk about the idea internally and you go off to the client and you would wait for them to return to find out, did they sell it or not? There was decision-making happening in that meeting. It lived or died in that meeting. And I think one of the big changes that's occurred is now there's more people being brought into the process to evaluate ideas. So it's not just the brand team that's saying, yep, that's a go, or nope. There's a lot of consultation around, is this idea right? And I think it's evolved because ideas have evolved, right? It used to be that you were off-selling a script, and it began and ended there. Well, now that script maybe starts online as a social poll, and then it influences what the television is, and then the television gets cut down and is used online. So the client has to bring in more and more people to evaluate that idea, which means you have to be much more savvy nowadays in terms of understanding the role of different media channels and really being an expert on those. So, I think one of the biggest changes, of course, with the fragmentation of media is that agencies have had to become experts in everything, right? And that's not easy. There's comfort zones and people love certain channels and they maybe got into the business because of, one of those channels and know it intimately. And now you sort of have to, learn what the new platform is and become an expert in it, or find partners within your company who are experts in it to help shape and change the idea, which I think is great. I mean, I like in campaigns nowadays to bank heists. So, Ocean's 11, we need to get into this casino and we need to get to the vault and we need to crack the code. So I need a getaway driver and I need a guy to suspend from the ceiling and I need someone small enough to fit into the vault and, a code breaker. And, productions are the same thing now. You kind of have to pull in all these different people to make this job happen, not just on the production side, but also inside the agency. So it's not just the art director and the writer now that are cracking it. It's, have we looped in the technology team and, have we brought in the social strategist and the PR, experts. And, now the idea isn't, owned by one or two people. It's owned by 8 or 9 or 10. So it's a different kind of philosophy you have to approach, idea making in these days. And I think if you're up for that collaboration and, you're willing to share the spotlight, I think, you'll thrive. And I think big agencies, it's funny because, I think we've all heard the demise of them and,
Sure.
I don't think that's the case. And I think, the more fragmented media becomes, I think actually the strength of a larger agency has the ability to pull on more of those levers and bring in more of those experts to actually formulate the idea. So, one thing that Wunderman Thompson is doing with the coming together of Wunderman and JWT is now there is this really kind of full service offering where, we can do everything from, the traditional quote unquote advertising to CRM, even down to the commerce level. So actually impacting what the transactions are like for our clients. And I think that's probably where the industry is going. I think clients are looking for a partner who can think through that entire process, not just the advertising element of it, because a lot of is impacted before and after that. So someone who can kind of look more broadly across the entire experience and can have a point of view or link those pieces together is going to come out on top.
What do you make of the valuation of certain media? I mean, clearly before with traditional media, there was the metrics to suggest that the valuation of the spend.
Right.
Now you have, if we take one example of, maybe social influence, and clients will look at that and how do you inside your place look at the value of those things? I know that it's a mix and it's a collective effort and everything has its place. But what do you make of that, seeing as the metrics, it seems as though it's still, the jury's still out on what the value of those things are?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to whatever that channel is, right? And I think there are biases, that exist either within, organizations or within, our clients in terms of experience, right? So maybe someone's had a experience with a social influencer before and didn't see the return on it that they thought they were going to get. So that kind of influences, well, are we going to use them again? Or if we are, what's the right time to use them and how much should we spend on them? So I think it really does differ a lot based on our clients and our categories. I think some categories lend themselves more to using things like social influencers, for example. So it can work really well. And then in some cases, they can only use their influence so far to move the needle on something, and it just becomes sort of a test and learn and maybe something they don't do again. So I think you have to be open to, and we certainly are, when's the right time to do it and when's the maybe not right time to do it. But that kind of goes back to, I think, really understanding the role of each channel. And, we really try hard to find people who do know, as a creative person, it's so overwhelming, the channels now you have to choose from. So we try to find people who do understand, what is the role of television? What is the role of online video? What is the role of an influencer in a campaign, so that when we are proposing those things to our clients, that they make sense. But it can be a lot, though. I mean, especially now when you have things like media agnostic briefs, where it's like, okay, what's this campaign going to be? It's like, oh my God, where do I start? This could be like a sponsorship thing, or this could be a party, or this could be a television campaign, or this could be a social response thing. Like, you have to be up to speed on all of it.
Well, I think, as one little side note, because the NAC brand competition is coming up soon, we're working with brands right now to trying to develop briefs and stuff. I think for a lot of clients, sometimes, when they see an unleashing of creativity, they're open to what it could be. But I always try to make the point, creativity seems to be much more, it always seems to be better to have more of a tightly defined kind of box rather than having it be totally open. Because you're right. I mean, if it couldn't be anything, that's daunting.
It is, yeah.
How do you know you're doing the right thing?
Yeah.
There's plenty of good ideas out there, but I think it was Lee Klaus or somebody said, the freedom of a tightly defined brief. I think I've always been a big believer of that.
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely.
it's just because I just don't like this whole openness, right?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to time as well, right? I mean, I think if you're looking to execute something really quickly, you do need a tighter kind of channel plan and that sort of thing, because you don't have time to kind of mess around with, what if this is some kind of new rogue technology or platform, we want to experiment with. But if you do have a bit more of a long lead time, I think that freedom can be enjoyable to kind of explore and think, hey, what should this campaign be? One thing I think has helped us a lot is strategy and the relationship that we have with strategy. And they are wicked smart. They're, much smarter than I am. Right. So, we'll have kind of crazy ideas on the wall, and we'll pull our strategy folks in and say, hey, like, is this even in the realm of possibility, or does this make any sense to do? And, they often act as sort of a good sounding board to say, you know what? No, but I see where you're coming from. And actually, if you do it this way, that would actually hit the target that you're trying to achieve. So I think, using strategy as a partner is sort of a lesson I've learned along the way too. And I think different agencies have different relationships with strategy too. And some there's a bit of, they're at odds, or, what exactly are they here for, or what have you. But I think we've been lucky to have an amazing strategy team, and we rely heavily upon them. So I think that's one of those key roles where if you're a creative person and you're looking to kind of up your game, it's one of those things where you may want to go and make friends with someone in strategy, because the insights that they can, deliver, or the way they can kind of help you see a campaign differently has been, really rewarding and amazing. And, I think it's always good to kind of learn something new too. So I think some of the best creatives I've met in the industry, are a little bit strategist, a little bit producer, a little bit account person.
Sure.
And they know, not to do those people's jobs, but they understand the value that they bring to the organization and to a project. And they know where their sort of limits are and, when they're out of their element. So they can kind of pull them in and say, hey, I'm really not sure about, this strategy or, why this takes so long to produce or what have you. Is there other ways of doing this, or can you help me understand? So, it kind of goes to being curious again. I think is a good kind of key trait to have.
Well, that would be a perfect dovetail into. I know that there's some people in the business who are all about the business. They deep dive.
Yeah.
Even outside of work, they are passionate about it. They follow it, every trend and who's doing what. But then on the other side, there are people who have other creative outlets that they find helpful in developing their own skills. Are you the ad animal, or do you have a passion outside of advertising that you feel is tangentially connected?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think there are some people who are really into stuff. I worked with a guy who was really deeply into beer, and he knew everything about the nuances of certain ales and lagers, and I was really fascinated by that. It's like to be that passionate about a subject that I just see as a delicious drink. Yeah, and it gets better when it's colder, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think I've gone fully down the rabbit hole on any one thing. I think I've got a lot of other interests. I love to cook, and I'm a bit of a foodie, so I like to delve into that world a little bit. Sports, of course, I'm a bit of a nut on, so I love to watch everything. Huge sports fan. So I think those have been kind of big influences in my life, and they're just good ways for me to kind of step away and recharge. And yeah, I think sometimes, at the end of the day, when you come home and you're cooking your own meal, there's something, really satisfying about chopping an onion. It's just, you can put your brain on neutral and just not think about.
Have you got the technique down? Because I've seen videos on how to chop an onion most efficiently, and I try to employ it, but I always end up having to hack around to kind of get the little bits.
What? I think I've got it down, and I'm not going to brag here, but I did take some schooling in some knife skills. Exactly, at George Brown. So I'm using classical methods of cutting an onion. So when I open the fridge and my fiance has been chopping an onion before me, and I pick it up and it's like this shape, I'm like, what? How did you get it this way?
We talked about this.
Yeah. I'm like, you don't do that. You chop it like this and then this. So I love, I love learning, in a broad array of subjects. So, but I haven't gone kind of crazy down one particular sort of side hobby. But yeah, who knows? Time will tell. I think something might come up and I might glob onto it and all of a sudden just become, a huge golf fan or
stamp collecting or whatever.
Bringing it back. Yeah.
Well, listen, we're coming to the end of our time here together, but I'd like to ask you one last question. I like to ask everyone who comes on, what are you focused on next? I know I'm not the type of person who goes, well, what's your 5 and 10 year plan?
Yeah.
But most people have something that's on their mind that they're fixated on that they'd like to achieve, or some goal. What are you excited about right now? What do you want to achieve over the next little while?
That's a great point. I mean, I think I love new challenges, and one thing that really excites me is helping clients, not just in the I need an agency for communication space, but that full sort of customer experience. So what are those things that are maybe further up the stream that we can help influence and help fix? So we're working on some projects that are almost like new products that would then need marketing communications and campaigns to support. But that gets me really excited. So, things like industrial design, environmental design, fixing technology problems inside of clients' businesses that, will help, sales, by making it easier for someone to interact or purchase with that client. So that gets me really excited. It's also a space where I feel like as a creative person, it's just another outlet, which is amazing. So, of course, mastery of communications is important, and understanding that, how to do that flawlessly, is always going to be, an important foundation. But, what are those other things along the way that maybe communications can't fix? So are there things about the product experience that we can make better? And really looking at the world and looking at our clients' businesses through that lens is really fascinating to me. And I think if, we've got certainly back at the agency, a team of people who do look at our clients' businesses that way and ask weird questions. Like what would it mean to have a better shopping bag? What would that look like? And, does it have a direct link to, possibly the outcome of an experience that someone has with the brand? And, how do we not just do what traditional agencies have always done, which is say, hey, we can't impact that. That's someone else's problem. But
that's an excellent thing to hear. I think about Mad Men, and you see the way that agencies used to work. They were right inside a client's business and informing things that went far beyond just the ad campaigns. Yeah. So it's kind of nice to hear in this, I think, in a world that we feel like is highly specialized now, that you're getting involved, stuff like that. So the first thing that pops into my head is, how do you bill for that? Which we won't get into.
That's a good question for our finance team. Yeah. No, but I think, as a creative person, I think, it's another problem to solve, right? And if creativity is the killer app for problem solving, why only apply it to communications? Why not apply it to the entire business? So we're doing that.
It's a great place to stop. I think it's been great for you to be on the program here. Really enjoyed talking to you. I tell people I know Ari enough to say hello, and we shake hands and we have a short conversation, but to sit down for an hour has been great and fascinating. So
this has been awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
This episode has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, North America's only brief-based challenge that sends winners to Cannes, France.